You're listening to The White Rabbit, conversations on the art of presenting in a rather noisy world. Your hosts are Matt Krause and Alper Rosanes. Matt helps leaders of international companies speak, write, and present with confidence. Alper is a communications trainer and a startup investor with a diverse portfolio of companies in Barcelona. If you like this podcast, please share it with friends and colleagues. Now, on to Matt and Alper for today's conversation. Matt, last week we talked about some of the practical and spiritual reasons behind why I do what I do. And we finished off by me making a promise that we're going to dig into yours. And I had also mentioned that you had mentioned the phrase bringing peace to other people, which had stuck with me for a very long time. And I'm very curious to pick your brains about that.
Okay, sure.
I want to ask you what you meant by that and how is it related to why or what you do?
Well, bringing peace to people. When you first think of that phrase, bringing peace to people, you think of peace as in the lack of,
Maybe.
lack of conflict, the lack of want. But that's not what I mean by that. Because one of the actually an even greater way to feel peace is to feel like you're doing what you want to be doing in life. So peace is not the lack of conflict. Peace is not the lack of want. Peace is doing what you want to be doing in life. That's the greater peace. And so when I say that I want to bring peace to people, that's what I mean is that I want to create an environment where they can get what they want out of life.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that some people want, not everybody, but a lot of people, one thing that a lot of people want is that they want to be able to communicate with others. They have a great idea and they want to broadcast that idea, or they want to find out what's on somebody else's mind, whatever. So they want to communicate with others better. And that's that brings them the greatest sense of peace, is to feel like they are on the path towards being able to do that better than they can do it now. And so, like, for example, when we look back to how you and I met at Toastmasters. Toastmasters was that club was a great way. It was filled with people who were on the same path. They were on the path of figuring out how to communicate with other people better. And so by bringing people peace, you don't need to be like the master of the peace. I'm certainly not the master of public speaking, far from it. You just need to organize the room, basically, that allows them to come together and practice that skill with each other. Does that make any sense?
That makes a lot of sense, actually. And I'm going to dig a little bit deeper by reminding you and asking you about the word patience you had used.
Okay.
Do you remember that conversation?
Yeah. So where patience comes into it is that in order to do this, in order to bring peace to people, you have to let them talk. You have to let them tell you what they want to do. And maybe they don't even know what they want to do, but through the process of them talking, they're going to vocalize what it is that they want to do, even if they don't realize it when they start out. You just got to let them run at the mouth. And that process of just sitting there listening to them it requires a lot of patience, because the natural human impulse, and God knows I have it as much as anybody, the natural human impulse is to want to jump in there and shout out whatever they're saying. That's the natural human impulse. And to close down that impulse, to shut down that impulse and just sit there and shut up, that takes a lot of patience.
That takes a lot of work too.
Yeah.
Right? You have to literally force yourself not to open your mouth.
Yeah, and that's hard. You've got to quash a very basic human impulse.
Yeah, which brings a question to my mind. Why did you take up on this job, not job as a trainer, but the job of keeping your mouth shut, showing patience and listening to the other people? Why did you take up on this task in the first place?
The task of bringing people peace. I mean, that's the main motivation.
Yeah.
Because if you can bring people peace, they're going to love you.
That's a good incentive.
Yeah, I was thinking of a more professional way to put it, but there isn't one. That's the root of it, is that if you can bring people peace, you're going to become known as the one who can bring people peace. And there are very few people, because it's such a natural human emotion to speak, much as I'm
Mm-hmm.
doing here, because it's
Mm-hmm.
a natural human emotion to speak. There are very few people who can bring peace to others. There are very few people who can shut up and learn the other person well enough to bring peace to them. And so if you can become one of those people, then you can become one of the, because let's say that there are only about 3% of the population has that skill. If you
Mm-hmm.
can learn that skill, just by learning that skill, you become one of the 3% of the population. You don't even have to be good at that skill. Just recognizing that skill or wanting to get better at it is often enough to put you in the top 3% of the population.
Mm-hmm. Can I pick your brain further on that?
Sure, go for it.
Because I want to ask, like, what are some of the biggest obstacles in this,
The biggest obstacles in what?
in keeping your mouth shut, or in the
Mm.
task of bringing peace through listening?
I would say the biggest obstacle is silence. It is really hard. I know this from experience, and I see other people experiencing the difficulty too. It's really hard to sit through a silence. You want to, like, the natural human impulse is, I want to fill that silence. And the natural way to fill a silence is by opening your mouth and speaking.
Mm-hmm.
So that's probably the hardest, and by far the biggest obstacle is just sitting through the silence, letting the silence, not trying to fill the silence.
That's a pretty difficult
Yeah.
obstacle. I mean, that's a very big obstacle, I can imagine. Do you experience any frustrations in achieving that?
Oh yeah, all the time. Let's back up a second to the difficulties of being silent. You know
Mm-hmm.
how, and you and I, as solopreneurs, we're very familiar with the sales meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And you know how, after you quote a price, and let's say it's, significantly higher than the price that you've quoted before, and
Mm-hmm.
there's a silence while your customer is considering what to say next. There's a moment of silence, and you want to fill that. There's so much pressure coming from you that you want to fill that silence,
Yeah.
but you just got to sit there and let it happen.
Yeah.
I'm
Uh,
sorry. I just got distracted by that. What was your question?
well, actually, you answered that, because that's one of the frustrations I was asking about. I
Mm,
understand that
mhm.
that's one of the frustrations I'm asking about, that
Yeah.
internal desire to say something, just to
Um,
remove maybe that discomfort of silence after quoting a high price. Yeah.
yeah. And,
Uh,
and we feel that it's not really in silence, but we feel that a similar frustration when we're presenting. We
hmm.
want to be the source of knowledge. We want to keep our mouths open. And sometimes in a presentation, it's one of the hardest things to do in a presentation is to just be silent. And maybe you're not silent for 20 minutes while somebody thinks about something. Maybe you're just silent for like 3 seconds,
Hmm.
as a pause between sentences. But it's even that is really hard to have that 3 second silence. So that comes up in when you're giving a presentation too.
Yeah. And I think that's what makes it one of the strongest tools in communicating
Yeah,
effectively or
yeah,
driving your point across.
absolutely.
I have one more question for you.
Sure,
You mentioned 3%, 97%. I mean, these are just numbers that we came up with.
sure.
They are not backed up by any statistics or anything.
True, true.
But apart from the fact that you chose to be among the 3%, can you
Mhm.
tell us what are some of the good practices for becoming a better listener, a more patient person? As we say in Turkish, to have the patience of a prophet, not
Mm.
to open your mouth and make people have more peace. How do you become one of those 3%?
The first thing that comes to mind is an exercise that I do regularly with people that I'm working with, and it's a filler word exercise. Actually, you'll be well familiar with this, being from with the Toastmasters background. You'll be well familiar with this, and it's when you want to say ah or just be silent instead. Let's say, for example, your sentence is, let's say, I'm changing the light bulb. Instead of saying I am
Mm,
changing the light bulb, you just say I am changing the light bulb. And in real life, of course, you're never going to speak like that in real life. You would,
You better
you
know.
would,
Yeah.
yeah, you would sound like a crazy person. So yeah, in order to practice those kinds of silences, you have to go into a room by yourself and speak by yourself.
Hmm.
But a lot of that becoming used to silences is it's just a conditioning therapy. There's a filler word for you.
Yeah.
A lot of becoming comfortable with silence in conversation is just conditioning therapy. It's becoming, and that conditioning therapy starts with becoming comfortable having silences in your own conversation and realizing that if there are silences in your own conversation, no one's going to die. Everybody's
Yeah.
going to live.
Yeah.
Uh,
And at this point, I would like to make a shout out to one of my former managers, Gülseren, who gave me one of the most valuable pieces of information any manager can give.
ooh, what was
We were in
that?
sales meetings. I was talking all the time, not listening to the customer. After the meeting, she gracefully commented that one of the best ways to listen to the customer that she practices, which she recommended me, was to actually slightly bite your tongue after you ask a
Hmm.
question and just
Oh, I
let
like
the
that.
person speak. And I mean,
Yeah.
this is a tip that I received about maybe 20 years ago. I still use it to this day. Every single time
Mhm.
I
Ooh,
realize that,
yeah.
okay, this is the moment I need to shut up and listen to the other person.
Yeah, and the idea of biting your tongue, you could make that literal. Like you could literally bite your tongue, and
I literally bite my tongue. Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
I mean,
Not to the point of
if
making it bleed, of course, but to remind me
yeah,
that this is the moment you shut up and listen.
yeah, that's true. You don't want to bleed. You don't want to bleed in a sales meeting. You also don't
Hmm.
want to bite your lip because that could be misread as a different
Yes.
kind of signal. But yeah,
Hmm.
nobody's going to see you bite your tongue. But sometimes
Yeah.
you that would definitely be helpful to actually physically bite your tongue.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ooh, that's a good piece of advice.
Well, I really like this conversation. Thank you for sharing those insights and those experiences with me. I have the
Sure.
sensation that in the future episodes we will dig deeper down the rabbit hole, aptly
Okay.
named for
Uh-huh.
for the title of our podcast.
Uh-huh.
And I really enjoy digging deeper with you in these conversations.
Yeah, I enjoyed it too. Thank you
Thank you.
very much.
See you next week.
All right, I'll talk to you later. See you
Bye
later.
bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to The White Rabbit with Matt Krause and Alper Rosanes. You can subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, iTunes, or through your favorite feed.